Imagine sitting in an office with your boss, telling her something really important. You see her head nodding back at you, in rhythm with an occasional head nod. But then her eyes start to glaze over a little, and she looks completely disconnected from the present moment. After a while, you realize she's not actually listening to you at all, but instead engaging in her own inner narrative. Have you ever been that person to someone else? I'm Catherine Brody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Chief of Staff Collective podcast. Stephen Covey said, most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. As chiefs of staff, one of our main job requirements is our ability to communicate effectively with others. This includes listening. And I mean really listening. In this episode, Zouhary of Cadenza Communications talks to us about the importance of developing communication skills as a chief of staff, putting an emphasis on the importance of truly listening and how foundational that skill is to human connection. KM's career led her to take on several different roles, including attorney, professor, improviser, and former chief of staff, all of which center on communication and human connection. Here's our interview with Zouhary. Listening is the key to human connection.
My name is Zouhary. I am the founder of Cadenza Communications.
Why don't you start by giving us a quick highlight reel of your career?
The highlights, not the lowlights.
Maybe a couple lowlights sprinkled in.
To mix it up.
Yeah.
The highlights of my career. I graduated from college and did what anyone whose parents have sacrificed a lot to put them through college would do, and that's take the train to Chicago and audition at the Second City Conservatory. And I had sort of a superhero thing, except without saving people, where I had to do quick changes often. So I would work for Accenture, the consulting firm, during the day, and then I would change into my Second City shilling outfit and sell T-shirts at the theater at night. So I would get to watch the show every night in addition to taking classes there. And after working at Accenture and for the theater, I moved to New York, where I continued to audition and perform off Broadway, and then had the phenomenal opportunity to move to the business side of the theater and worked on Hairspray the musical, and then decided to go to law school. And after my first year of law school, got this phenomenal opportunity to serve as the chief of staff of the National Endowment for the Arts. So I took a year off to do that, and then came back, finished law school, became a practicing attorney, and am now a professor and have my own company. And the way I describe it is, said a different way, I am at the center of a very weird Venn diagram. I'm an attorney, comedic improviser, and a professor. So those are the three circles. And you'll find some people who dance in between two of them, but there are very few of us in this particular three-ring circus that are improvisers, professors, and attorneys.
I would imagine. If you find one, you're like, oh my gosh, who are you?
I know. It's a lot of, the cheese stands alone. The cheese stands alone. But It's been fun to go on this journey with other professionals and learn their stories that make them totally unique and in the center of their own geometric structures, whether it be a Venn diagram or something different.
And honestly, I'm going to tell you, when you shared that background, I loved that you went from Hairspray to law school, and you didn't tell us, you weren't like, so I realized that maybe that wasn't, and then I decided maybe law, you were just like, I went from Hairspray, then I decided to go to law school. Like it was just, another day, another decision for you.
But that's improv. That's how it is for when you think about how you went from the big steps you did and you founded your own company that's really keyed in on helping this chief of staff community, in some ways, you woke up and you said, Catherine, today's the day. That's how I hear your brain talking to itself. And in other ways, it was the natural progression of something that happened over the course of time. And I think if we're going to find lessons for chiefs of staff in this chat we have, the first one is that almost every decision and major sort of turning point or inflection point could be seen as someone responding to information in the moment and something that's been building for a long time. And it's really a matter of perspective and how we communicate it.
Right. So you're in law school and this opportunity for a chief of staff role comes about. Tell us more about that.
It was a serendipitous moment for me that changed the course of my career and my life. I had worked in New Hampshire and South Carolina and in many states campaigning for this young upstart whippersnapper, Senator Barack Obama, and was really invested in his campaign and election, as were many of the theater people with whom I worked in New York City. And as it turned out, President Obama appointed Rocco Landisman, who is this maverick, singular theater producer, to be the chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts. And I was back seeing theater friends after sort of the brutal 1L exam period, giving him such congratulations. And he looked at me and said, "Would you like to come to DC and serve with me?" And it knocked the wind out of me, both because it was so unexpected and I wanted something like that so badly, an opportunity like that. So that was how the offer was made. And it was one of those opportunities that aligned many stars. First, I care so deeply about the arts. I care so deeply about the role that the arts play in our society. The second was, if I was ever going to serve, and I felt very strongly about serving my country in some way, it was going to be in this administration and with this chairman. And third is, I had the chance to serve Rocco, who was such a phenomenal leader, a man who'd always worked for himself, a visionary, a creative, someone who cared deeply about the arts in this country and the impact that they could have on individuals from big cities to small towns and institutions of all shapes, sizes, colors, creeds. So this was a once-in-a-lifetime gig. So I jumped and said, I'll figure the rest out later.
Were you at all familiar with the chief of staff role?
I was familiar with the chief of staff role from a couple different places. The first was, as a child, my first exposure to it was my mother worked as the vice president general counsel for a hospital system. And so, you know, the chief of staff in the hospital world was something that you knew of or was generally known.
And it was a physician, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
The title wasn't as odd to me. And this was an agency that did not have an acting chief of staff when I joined. And because of the way that the GSA grades things politically, it became an arts policy advisor role that morphed into a chief of staff role that my successors then took. And as we know, the chief of staff role morphs and changes over time based on the principal's needs and the agency's needs. And certainly that happened with this role at the agency.
After the chief of staff role, you go back to law school. How do you think the role enhanced your remaining years in school?
I mean, I really think it's that question of, did it impact me in school? Absolutely. I came back with an invaluable perspective about different audiences, about how to run and manage. Law schools really care about teaching leadership right now. I felt like I had this boot camp in leadership and what it means, and saw my own failings and knew my own skills in a way that some of my colleagues didn't as we confronted this question. And so it wasn't really limited to school, quite frankly. It was just in terms of the rest of your life. How are you going to improve? How are you going to be the type of leader you want to be? How will you persuade others? How will you manage crisis? All of those things had a framework, and I had now experienced them in a way that my career and my education to that point hadn't given me a chance to process.
Yeah. So tell us more about your work today at Cadenza Communications.
Here's what I know. I know that artificial intelligence and AI is the thing that people want to talk about so much. And here's the only thing I know about AI. It cannot take human connection from us. Mm-hmm. And that's what I teach. AI and the recession, there may be things that go away. The computers will learn facial recognition. They will learn that, but they won't be able to connect in the way that you and I connect, Catherine, when we make eye contact, in the way that even in this conversation, our tone and the way we interrupt or don't or interject, the patterns of our conversation, there is a connection between human beings that's undeniable, that makes us unique. The machines may replicate it or imitate it, but they can't do it human to human. And that's why I founded Cadenza Communications, because it's recession-proof, it's robot-proof, and it's real. It's the thing that holds us together and binds us together. It underlies our business decisions. It underlies our hiring decisions. And it is, to play on words, it's primal. It really is what you're about as a chief of staff. It's the thing that makes you successful or not successful. So I take my legal background, my teaching background, and my improv background, and I train people either through workshops to create collaborative teams that know how to communicate better with each other. I coach individuals, and I put together custom programs that take a particular institution or group's theme, mission, challenge, and we put together improv-inspired interactive workshops, video training to help folks leave better, smarter, more comfortable communicating than they came in.
Very interesting. Well, and it sounds like, I mean, because you said this, the common thread, and maybe, you know, this is something we see looking back, we don't really know at the time, but from this Venn diagram of improviser, professor, lawyer, communication and really human connection is at the heart of all of those things.
Yes. And it's connection. My life has been defined by connection to others. I mean, let's take this podcast. The first time you and I spoke, we found all of these shared connections. We were, quote unquote, set up by a friend, and you were thinking of me for a potential chief of staff role. But you and I both had the ability to communicate in that moment, and we saw something larger for strategic partnership down the road. That's connection. I connected with when I gave birth and needed my husband to be in the room with me when they administered that sweet, sweet anesthesia, right? That was about making a connection with the people who had the drugs and could make that happen. Connection. I remember a time when I was mediating a really difficult case, and the lawyer on the other side had no client control at all. I had to connect with the mediator to get the mediator to come on my side and really help steer things in a way that's atypical for a mediator. So it's connection. It's always connection. It's finding people and meeting them where they are and helping to persuade them to see the world or an issue a little bit more in the way that you do and spur them to act in a way that's helpful.
Okay, so drawing the line then between connection and communication, it sounds like communication allows us to connect. Is that what you would say?
You just said it. I would say I agree with Catherine. I think when we talk about connection, when we talk about communication, and truly when we talk about leadership, those three things have a whole lot of cross-pollination going on. When you read the scholarship on leadership, when you read the scholarship on communication, so much of what is said, there's a great deal of interplay. So I agree with Catherine. I'm going to make those buttons.
I think that would be a great button, honestly.
Excellent.
Yeah. So in your words, how do you define communication?
I try not to. Communication can be so many things. And in this world of emojis to tone, there's so many ways that we relay information to one another and forge connection with one another. What I am super interested in is the interplay between the words, the tone, and the nonverbal communication. And I think more and more as people become interested in generational differences, gender differences, diversity questions, it's the way that the nonverbal, the tonality, the volume, and the word choice are inspired by who we are as people and our ability to give and receive those messages. So helping others to understand what comes naturally to them, what they may have to tweak a little, but that feels authentic, and how they're receiving messages, especially for a generation that has had technology so deeply interwoven into the way they learn and all their learning spaces. I remember one of my most difficult moments as a chief of staff. We were still in the BlackBerry days, and I had 2 BlackBerries.
Yep, love it.
And there was an urgent issue popping up on my BlackBerry and something a colleague was saying that was funny about that issue. And I was in a meeting that was very important to the principal. And I looked down and checked the BlackBerry. And that was a bad moment and a black mark on me that I haven't repeated since. And that's why I really encourage phones down. It's a huge piece of things to be connected, to have that eye contact, to be present. We miss so much when we're not there. So I think when you ask me to define communication, I can come up with some definitions, some more theoretical, some more practical. But I really like to say I know good communication and less effective communication when I see it.
Right.
And I think it's more helpful for us to talk about those particular examples and what we can learn from them, because the broader definitions aren't as helpful to us as professionals.
You know, it's interesting. It's like some of the same stuff we say for the chief of staff role when somebody's like, how do you define this position? I mean, it's like there's so many ways you could define this kind of role that it's like easier to say like that's it. Or that's just not it.
Mm-hmm. And maybe the answer, maybe you and I have to stop providing definitions. You know, we want to get the A+ on the test, but maybe the answer is, you know, how do you define a chief of staff? I don't. I look at the organization, I look at the principle, I look at the mission, I look at the needs, and that defines who the chief of staff should be. It's so specific. And much in the same way, when we talk about communication, it's so specific to what a particular organization and individual, who they are. We can come up with some outlines and some general principles. But to me, what's fascinating about the ways we interact with each other and who is successful and who isn't is all about individual examples of something going fabulously well and something blowing up. Nobody being hurt, a metaphor, of course, but something really not being a good day.
Let's talk about some of the examples of good communication.
Let's do it.
Do you have kind of these moments in your mind from your own experiences where you're like, that was strong, whether it was something you did or something that you saw someone else do?
Absolutely. The first particular to a chief of staff is plan out your listening tour and plan it as strategically and thoughtfully as humanly possible, and plan a very broad listening tour. I think that's important in any organization and will help you develop the trust you need with key lieutenants, help you figure out who your squeaky wheels might be, who the skeptics and the doubters are, and the more immediate the connection, the communication with folks from across the organization, the better suited you're going to be to persuade, to enter into negotiation, and to develop strategic partnerships with folks throughout the organization.
You're really saying like, hi, I'm a communicator. You're opening that line very early for people, saying, I emphasize communication as the chief of staff. Yeah.
I don't want to step on your toes, Catherine, because you're the chief of staff guru, but I want to re-envision this role as the chief engagement officer. You are your own CEO, chief of staff. You are the chief engagement officer, internally and externally. You are the most engaged with the individuals, the teams, the mission. You are the person who knows where the bodies are buried, or whatever the metaphor is that your particular institution uses, where the gold is hidden. You are that person. You are that deeply engaged. And yes, I think that starts from day one. I think it starts before day one.
Right.
That's the pre-work, where you start building those relationships, both internally and externally, right? Because the chief of staff role, the chief engagement officer, can be lonely. And so to find those partners externally who you can confide in, who are going to help you shape this role and be real sounding boards for you, those sponsors and mentors in your own career, really dig in with them and get them invested in your starting off. Really, with the principal, figure out how you want to set the communication tone. My mother gives a ton of advice. The best advice, hands down, she has ever given me is, when you get married, be very conscious of what you do in the first 6 months of that marriage, because that is the pattern and tone you set for the rest of your marriage. Yeah. So don't go crazy above and beyond with the dishes and doing everything, because that's the habit. That's the pattern, right? And it doesn't say, look, I love my husband. Let me start. I should have started this podcast by saying I love my husband. He's the best. He really is. But in any marriage or partnership, you're setting habits, and that goes for the chief of staff and the intimate, trusting, beautiful thing that it can be between a chief of staff and a principal. You've got to set great habits and patterns that are very intentional in the first days. So I would tell chiefs of staff to take my mother's advice. If not personally, then definitely professionally in that marriage that is chief of staff and principal.
Which brings up a great point. I'm glad you said that about
that I'm giving you relationship advice, Catherine, on the podcast?
Yeah, it's for free, to be honest. I mean, this is great. So we'll get into my relationship here in a minute. But I love the idea of setting precedent in this position, because I think often these high achieving chiefs of staff that we are, we want to start out on a great foot, and we want to respond immediately to everything and just be there all the time. But it gets me thinking about this idea of communication and response, and the difference between reacting to something and actually responding to it. And not just, I feel like especially in the frenzy of business and email and BlackBerry, it's so easy for us to get an email from our principal and, okay, got it, on it, and we don't even think about what we're supposed to do. It's just sure, got it, done. We'll do it.
It's automatic.
Right.
There's a tension in the current business cycle when it comes to client service. And really the chief of staff is, serving the client of the principal, the institution, the staff. There's a tension between I am on it. I am on 24/7. I am most highly responsive. So when you send me something, it's being taken care of. And being thoughtful and creative. There is a tension there. Like with communication and chief of staff, I am ill-equipped to provide definitions and definite answers. But I think by acknowledging the tension, setting some boundaries, and it really is sort of, what a true emergency or crisis is, and what a all hands on deck is, and what I'm going to let this person know I'm on it versus here's the answer. Sometimes I'm on it, I need some time to think about this, and I want to run it by so-and-so can be really reassuring to the principal. Okay, I know she's handling it. It's going to get taken care of. She's thinking about it, but I don't have the answer right away. That can be deeply satisfying. But it means sometimes admitting I don't know or I don't have the answer right away. And as you described, chief of staff, right? You guys are probably listening to this on your bicycle while drinking celery that you've extracted yourself and grown in your backyard before you feed the underserved. Chiefs of staff are doing 1,000 things at once, right? And so that's difficult for perfectionists and A+ types to feel, oh, I don't know the answer and I don't know it immediately. But I think once you acknowledge that tension, start to be intentional about the ways you communicate and don't treat every email like a crisis, that can be really helpful and also boost your own sanity, which I'm always for.
Yes.
Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does. And I think what's also interesting is when you talk about words, tone, and nonverbal, the nonverbal matters too. I've used the example before of, so you're on a plane and it's extremely turbulent. And I always look to the flight attendant. And if the flight attendant is just continuing to make the drinks and, smile on her face or his face, I'm all right, we're not going down. This is me. We're going to be all right.
When do you stop letting go of the hand of the person next to you?
Right, exactly. It's really on the thigh, and it's a deep, squeeze. Yeah. And then
you want a real muscle. You want a real muscle to hold on to.
I need something, firm. So if I look at her or him and they're sitting down, buckling in, they're grasping the thigh of their colleague, I'm terrified. And I think often we look to the chief of staff as that pulse of is this ship sinking? Is the plane going down, or are we good? And I think it's so much easier at times to verbally or in writing communicate, we're fine. But people can read that on you.
It's true. One of my favorite game shows to play, this is not a non sequitur. This answers your question. There is a game show I like to play with folks when we're working on team communication that's sort of a, how should I say it? And everyone claps and applauds, and we can play it newlywed game style or not. But it's really about what's the best way to communicate this message through text, through Slack, through email, picking up the phone and calling, getting folks in a room. What's the best way to communicate each message? And I think so much of that is not thoughtful, but rather what's easy for me? What communication mode am I the most comfortable communicating in? And gut instinct, as opposed to being thoughtful about the mode. And you're right, when you're looking to the flight attendant chief of staff to see whose thigh is he grabbing, what is the pained look on her face, is she turning ghastly white? It's really more important to be intentional and take the extra minute to think, what's the best way to communicate this message?
That's a great point.
How am I communicating it with my face or my emojis?
Right. And the tone that I have, which is something that I've always struggled with.
Why?
Because I think at times my tone, and this is so apt for what you just said, through my lens, my tone is like, this is Catherine, this is how I say it. But in how it's being received, it's not always the same. I have command as my number one strength, if for those Strengths Finders fans out there. So everything I say is with what sounds like a lot of conviction behind it, even the most simple things. So, take out the garbage. And it can come off to people as a bit harsh. And it's direct, and it's,
How did you learn that your command, your strength came across in this other way? Did someone give you that feedback? Were you ordering a pizza one day and they started crying when you asked for pepperoni? Yeah, and people are like taken aback,
Yeah.
No, really? How did you learn?
It's exactly how it happened. I would see the reactions of others, whether it's family members, colleagues, and I would say, oh, that landed differently than how it departed my mouth or how it was meant to come out. I'm not saying like, you're terrible, but even saying take out the garbage in a certain tone, it can arm people with a defense or that reaction that I think is really interesting. So it's just getting me thinking. I mean, it's crazy. You just said words, tone, nonverbal. And I'm thinking of all of those things now and how I deliver it, but then also how it's received.
It's major.
Yeah.
What you're talking about is your ability to recognize in other people how your communication is landing. And that's the strongest feedback that we get about how effective we are with communication. One thing that has come up over and over, and am I allowed to curse on this podcast?
Sure. We're rated PG-13.
Really?
Yeah.
I just hate to do it. But what I will say is this. One of my least favorite phrases that has emerged recently has been resting bitch face. Yeah. I just hate it because it's so gendered. But something I hear particularly from women is I've been accused of having RBF. And I don't have it. It's this thing of you, right? I'm just telling you to take out the garbage, my friend.
Yeah.
Why are you taking offense to this? And many people say, I've been told that I have this thing that now has a terribly gendered, horrible phrase. But those people who you can't tell, what are they thinking? And one of our biggest challenges, if we are going to beat the robots and really connect with each other, is to understand what it is about how we communicate that can sometimes send the wrong messages, and seek the kind of feedback that you benefited from when you ordered the pizza and made the woman cry, or that some of my clients have when people say I have this thing. And that means watching ourselves on video, hiring somebody like me to come in and let's really assess and have a conversation. Because if we believe that communication is a skill, and all those people who study it say this is a skill, what does that mean? It means you weren't born fresh out of the womb, Catherine being the most excellent communicator and chief engagement officer and chief of staff. You worked at it. But for some chiefs of staff in particular, because you are good communicators, because you are connectors and engagers, you think, I'm going to improve the things I'm not so good at. I'm going to take this management training course. I'm going to become steeped in my industry and learn everything I can about it. That's like an athlete or an opera singer who is at the top of their game saying, it's like Serena Williams saying, I'm not going to hit backhands. My backhand's really good. I'm just not going to, go out and get the reps in. Or an opera singer saying, you know what, scales and warm up, I know I can hit the notes, not for me. No, right. It's professionals. It's the same for us. Our listening, our communication skills are evolving as we evolve, are evolving as our organizations and our principles evolve as our audiences evolve. So we've got to spend the time. There was a Forbes article a couple years ago that said approximately 2% of professionals surveyed work on listening, actively cultivate these skills. Yeah. And I always, when I'm teaching and working with big groups, I say, 2%. Maybe good for milk, not good for business, not good for us. We've got to do better than that when this is so key to our success, so key to the success of our organizations.
I love that. And I think we need to make communication great again, because I see communication skills thrown around in every position description I look at, right at the top of the qualifications after education, and postgraduate work, it's communication skills. And I don't even think we really understand what that means. I mean, I don't think even we in the position descriptions we write always think about that. And I remember even one day writing it as a bullet point and going, what are we talking about when we put this down here? Because I think we often associate, or at least I do, communication skills with written and verbal, because we hear that over and over again. And we never think about listening as a critical communication skill.
Oh, it's everything. It's everything. And I'll say it's everything for a couple reasons. So first, there's Professor Morabian has the 7-38-55 rule, which a bunch of people debunk. But let's just say generally that even if those numbers are a little off and can be for professionals, that communication is 55% nonverbal, 38% tone of voice, volume, all of those things, and 7% is words.
Wow.
That's the general principle. And what we know is nonverbal is so important. For example, a very senior executive at a company told me that one of the key lieutenants on his team would begin to nod when he had only just started a thought. And I think this lieutenant thought, I'm affirming, I'm giving the nonverbal response, but it was the timing of it. It was the fact that it came before the principal had reached the final conclusion or gotten to the meat of the message. And that nonverbal communication said to him, actually, this person isn't listening. This person is just being a yes man and agreeing just for the sake of agreement. Whereas others who have a face that is totally stony are giving off very little for the person to say, here's how my message is hitting. And so there are a bunch of games, and I'm almost hesitant to call them games, but there are exercises we can play that are at the heart of improv comedy, because to be able to create something out of nothing, you have to be fully present. This listening muscle has to be there. And you have to have what athletes have, this soft focus that allows you to take in the full court, or if you're a theater person, the soft focus that allows you to take in any particular change on the stage and adapt and be fully in that moment. And why is that such a challenge, Catherine? Because of what you're talking about. The iPhone's going off, the computer's going off, the phone's going off. Right. Our level of distraction, our level of need to be right and be right immediately. The pace of business has complicated listening, and we're not practicing it. And that can lead to a perfect storm and unintended consequences where someone says, gosh, this chief of staff is really cold. This chief of staff never gets the hint, never takes the message. And the other problem then is we get into grooves and patterns of behavior where, gosh, I was talking to a principal the other day, and they have someone on their team who they just learned has ADHD. Everyone else on the team thinks this person is a rambler and just cannot get to the point. And now this principal knows, first of all, that's true. And second of all, by the way, there's an underlying condition here. So the question is, how does this team work together with this person who has not just a communication hurdle, but a true disability? And how do we help this person succeed and help establish new grooves of communication, new communication patterns with the team? These are the real business questions that if we're chief engagement officers, we need to solve for our teams, because they help us get the right answers more creatively and better. That all comes down to listening.
Yeah. And, going back to the listening tour, which I love that we call it that because it really emphasizes listening. But I think a lot of chiefs often are. So when you're new to the role, right, you want to introduce yourself. You want to prove to people that you are credible, that you're confident, that you should be there. And so I think often during that listening tour, people are using it for the wrong reasons. It's more as their stump speech and not necessarily to listen to what people are telling them, And so how do you using that as an example, because you mentioned the phones and the distractions we get there. I'm also sometimes distracted by what I want to say, what I want to make sure I get out in a conversation with listening to what the person's telling me. And even these podcast conversations, right? It's we have questions that we want to get to. We have sort of points that we want to make. And I've got to listen to what you're telling me and somehow get that stuff in. And so, it's funny with me, sometimes I'll leave a conversation and say I didn't get through 5 of the 7 things that I meant to, because you just allow for that conversation. So how do you listen, but at the same time ensure your points are getting through?
Right. We don't have listening meetings where the purpose of the meeting is, let me take in everything Catherine has to say.
Yeah.
There's an agenda.
Right.
There are items that must be accomplished. We need to know the status of where deliverables are. We need to come up with creative solutions. So let's acknowledge that you're not going on the listening tour to just listen. Although that is one of the times when I would argue your agenda should play second fiddle to getting information. Because I think in that tour as a chief of staff, the most important agenda item for you is to get as much information about the individual's institution to serve you as you start on this journey. So there, the interests are aligned. Generally, I think listening is something that does a couple of things. First, it affirms what the other person is saying. So if you can give clues that you're affirming, that's okay. Interjection is also okay. If you set the tone at the beginning and you say, I'm really rushed. I'm sorry. I have only 15 minutes for our conversation, and I know we had planned on more time. I apologize in advance, Catherine, but I may interrupt you from time to time, just because I have a couple of things I really need to get through. And what I'm going to ask of you is to forgive me for interrupting and sort of forcing the conversation in the way I need to, and follow up with me on any of the pieces that we don't get to. That sets the rules of engagement for that conversation and says, look, I'm here for a purpose. I have less time than I wanted to, and I'm going to help direct things. When I'm coaching folks, I often start with an apology. I should just call my memoir, Hello, I'm Sorry. I come in and I say, hi, I'm sorry. But in order to get you in the moment when we're doing something that might be improved or where I want to hear from you on it, I'm going to interrupt the conversation, and that's going to disrupt our flow. But that's intentional. And if we can agree that's a good way to work, it can change the nature of a coaching session and not have us say, remember at the beginning when you do, it doesn't work as well that way. That's how I sound in my own head. Hello, can you?
But that's actually, it brings up a good point about, I feel like for the chief of staff, right, you're sort of in this position that's nowhere on the org chart. And so a lot of people do feel this need in the role to establish themselves as credible with command for the position. Because sometimes their peers are leadership team members who have 20, 30 years of experience on them. So how do you talk to people about using communication to demonstrate other traits or qualities like presence? We talk about that a lot with chiefs of staff or any kind of leadership position. Well, they need that gravitas or that presence, the executive presence to be in this kind of role.
Right. Well, Sylvia Ann Hewitt in the book Executive Presence says there are 3 pillars: gravitas, appearance, and communication. And it's very difficult to read a book about leadership and who effective leaders are without coming up against their communication style. And what we've learned from TED Talks and the literature is this idea of introvert, extrovert, or any other definition you may have applied to yourself has nothing to do with your ability to be viewed as a leader by communicating well with other people. It's a skill that can be improved. So yes, presence, The executive presence that's needed is absolutely conveyed by communication. But to your point, when you're working with a team of 20 to 30 years in an organization, or just a particular, even folks who just arrived, but who may have come to your organization from Silicon Valley and bring an expertise about social media or technology that is so deep and foreign to other people. It may be an expertise, it may be longevity. You lead from every seat, and you will need to be led by those people and educated by those people on your team. And a willingness to do so is not a willingness to show weakness. That's strength. The best leaders have the best teams. And to me, one of the great interview questions, and Sylvia Ann Hewitt talked about this once, which was where I got it, is an executive always closed an interview with, who in this organization do you have in your pocket? And especially after having been an attorney where you live and die by teams of lawyers and paralegals and administrators, and especially on a high intensity piece of litigation, you need to have those relationships in place. And I believe, Catherine, and would be interested in your thoughts on this, that those relationships are developed by deferring to other folks, by giving them credit, by honoring their strengths. And that's leading from every seat. Right. I have learned that the hard way and have come to believe that it's really acknowledging the value that everybody brings and communicating that to them. Yes. Not just knowing, oh gosh, Catherine's the smartest person on the team. She's got the most institutional knowledge. It's telling the people that, telling them how you rely on them. And I think that's hard, particularly for chiefs who are working with a team, maybe of the internal candidate who got overlooked for the role, right? If there are sharks in the water, it's tough to say to the shark, you've really got a lot of intelligence. Boy, oh boy, do I appreciate you. I'm not saying go Pollyanna and give the shark your arm. But what I'm saying is lead from every seat and acknowledge that that's what's happening organically with the folks in your organization.
And I mean, getting back to your point about the chief engagement officer, I think that's true engagement, right? For a role like a chief of staff, it can be, we talk about this a lot, it can be easy to just take on the work of others instead of recognizing the wonderful qualities and strengths that someone has and relying on them for those. It's like, fine, I'll just do it. I can do it. Let me just do that. You sort of want to be this hub, in the hub and spoke model. Everything revolves around you. And that's not sustainable, nor is it engaging a team, nor is it empowering others, to be as successful as they can be. And so I think that really is something we can be doing. And it's a true sign of connection with other people, and part of me got to thinking when you talked about how isolating people can feel in this role is,
isolated, not isolating, hopefully, although maybe both,
I think. Yeah. To some degree,
isolate
right?
Others, feel isolated yourself.
Well, and I think that gets to the point of how are you creating connection in this role? And just as you said, that connection can be with your internal colleagues, but it can also be external. And we have to find connection where we can find it, and maybe at times you feel isolated because you still need to create more of that connection.
To me, that's the beauty of the space you've created for chiefs to come together, where when it gets difficult, it's hard to know where to restart or how to be creative when you feel stuck or feel isolated, or you have had to be the hammer, or you've had to deliver difficult messages, and people are connecting and becoming more engaged outside of you, because that's the difficult part of the chief of staff role. And a lot of times, to allow the principal to shine or succeed, you have to be the one whose name is on, or is the one who to deliver some tough messages, or be a conduit to some difficult messages. So I couldn't agree with you more. You've got to find that connection through other chiefs or through your own sponsors and mentors, or really cultivate those relationships with folks where you then go to them and say, it's been a really tough time recently. What are your thoughts on it? And that's when you really re-engage in the listening and get more information that can be helpful to you.
People see through communication when it's like, come on, guys, this is an exciting time. We've got all this change. It's a very alarming time. It's a very scary time. Change is very difficult for people. So how you navigate something like that isn't simply, going around being the cheerleader saying, all right, change is on its way. This is an exciting time for us today.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, right. That's what
dancing?
I did. You could tell I was a chief of staff, right? So it's like the way we even think about something like that, that's not a one and done thing. And it's certainly not easy, where the person at the front desk feels as excited and motivated as the person at the top.
Here's what I will say about the person in the crisis, right? Who's come in to clean up, and there's been a changing of the guard or a cleaning of house, and they're doing this listening tour with people who have just gone through a change and are feeling either disenfranchised or disenchanted or both. Here's the lesson from improv comedy. If you're on stage and people aren't laughing, you are not as funny as someone has consumed Miller Lite or paid for you to be. What do? You call out the only thing that's true for everyone in the room. Something is happening that's not funny. That's your lifeline to the audience to get them back. Because after things are so not funny for so long, it's very difficult to get them away from their beers or their cell phones. And likewise in business, if something's happening in the room that's true for all of us, communicate that to your team. This is not the way I wanted to start here. And things are going to be really tough for the next couple of months. And I wish they weren't. But I appreciate you all coming to me honestly, and all of us really trying to make this a place where we look forward to coming to work. And it may not feel that way. And I appreciate that. But I want you to know I'm working to change it. And I see that you're working to change it too. Call out the elephant in the room. Don't let it be, or, it may not get rid of the elephant, but at least you all know something is really smelly with a long tail that's eaten a lot of hay. You've acknowledged it. You've acknowledged its presence. And that can be powerful for a team, because people like to talk a lot about authenticity for leadership. I find that the most effective communicators are the ones who say, here's what's happening. If I'm doing a workshop with people and it's clear that we've gone too long without a potty break, or people need food or caffeine, I'm going to work with the agenda, because we're all going to be much more effective after we acknowledge that we're all human beings that need breaks. Or if there's breaking news that's happening in the world, right, to acknowledge what's going on. Somebody passed away who's a significant figure. You've got to acknowledge what's true for everyone and potentially use it to move towards your business objective. That's powerful leadership. That's somebody who's authentic, who's comfortable enough in their own skin to say, I came in with a plan, but I'm okay to change course, to make sure we're all comfortable and acknowledging what's true for all of us here in this organization.
I like that. Communicate what is true to the group. There's a common bond, right? There's a common connection that you can create by doing that. And I think that brings up a really good point, and I think a question that's kind of been stirring in my head around authenticity, where I'll never forget when I was a chief of staff, my boss, Melody, would wear these really fashion forward outfits. And here I am from Des Moines, Iowa, in my Banana Republic, khakis. And I wasn't wearing khakis then, but you get it. It was plainer than hers. And they were great. And she was unapologetic about that. And that was who she was. And sometimes we'd show up in these meetings and people would be like, whoa, look at that collar. You could just see it on their faces.
Were you as unapologetic about your Banana Republic khakis?
I tried to be. She would, make these comments like, oh, that purse, but I was like, hey, look, I like this purse,
Good for you.
This is a good purse, and it's evergreen. It's always going to be, but, we would go sometimes to these pension meetings. So, going to meetings with state and government, employees, and she would definitely tone it down. And we had this conversation once about, so what's authentic to you and just who you are and how you represent yourself versus when you decide to be malleable or shift a bit, right? It's not like she was, being totally not herself, but she definitely toned it down. So when is our communication just, this is who we are, this is how we communicate, versus seeing that reaction to take out the garbage and bending it or changing it so that it's perceived or delivered the right way to our audience, whoever that might be? That was a long question, but do you get what I'm saying?
I get what you're saying. You're describing two things. One is appearance, and the second is communication, and how we all have a range within those two categories that's comfortable and authentic for us. And how do we find a place along the spectrum that feels authentic, that gets what we want from our audience?
Yeah.
The answer there is it's different for each individual. And the folks who struggle with this the most are the folks where there's some type of intersectionality at play, where you're authentic. Having a conversation with your mother is totally different than you having a conversation with your colleague at work, because the difference between those people is gender, sexual orientation, race. I mean, it can be, 4 or 5 different items. And there's also the history of the relationship there that plays a big role in how you authentically communicate. It's why I love Thanksgiving stories when I'm teaching communication, because when you go back to that table with those people, all of a sudden you become this version of yourself that you are not professionally. It's something I use a lot in negotiation workshops. If you're negotiating over Thanksgiving with the people at that table, what tools and tricks and skills are you using or not using that you use at work, and why? And a lot of it comes down to what your pattern has been, what your relationships are, and what feels authentic to you at that table. I think acknowledging your range of authenticity and being strategic about the choices you make, especially given intersectionality and how we're viewing our colleagues in the workplace, is critical. It's more than ever.
Yeah.
And watching yourself on video can be one way to discover that. The changes that you want to make or the ways that you light up, and being able to call on those intentionally rather than having someone else's tone or message or nonverbals light them up for you.
I love that. I think we all need to watch ourselves more. Bringing it back to when I was a drum major, huge band nerd. I remember going to an academy. That's right.
I can't imagine you as a nerd. You're wearing Banana Republic khakis.
I know, right? I know.
This doesn't compete.
Playing saxophone. Yeah. So I went to this drum major academy, and we learned how to conduct the marching band. And I remember...
That's Chief of Staff 101. You could do a really amazing boot camp there.
I really think we should.
That's really giving muscle memory to one of the key skills.
Yeah.
Go on, I'm interrupting your
but
story.
I mean, here I am like conducting, right? And I feel like I'm just killing it. Like what I'm seeing the instructor do, I'm doing, and I'm killing it. Okay. And then they said, we're going to come around, and for 5 seconds, because there were hundreds of us there, we're going to videotape you. And so we were all in a line, and this video camera would hit each one of us for 5 seconds. And then we had to watch it. So we went into this classroom and they put it on, and I'm like, just wait till I come up. I killed it, guys. Like Jurassic Park. It was just great. And I watched myself, and I looked like a bird, flapping wings, like nothing, like how I thought I looked. Yeah. And it was like, wow. In my mind, I looked totally different. And now watching it back, that is not at all how I looked. And I think often, we do need to take the time to look in that mirror, to watch the videotape back and go, oh, got it.
That's tough.
Yeah.
How old were you when you saw that? And did you make any changes based on what you saw on the video?
Yes. Great questions. I was probably 16, 17 years old. Ugh, not a time you want to watch yourself on video. Let me tell you. But I did. There was a lot going on in the wrist, needed to have more in the arms. I definitely changed some things, and it was just so good that they took the time to do that, because had I not seen that back, I'd still be flapping my arms like a bird today, and nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. But I think that's a really great point. And I think sometimes I love to make this point too, because I think about our relationship, Cam. And when we first met, you were so refreshing. And talking about authenticity and communication, You weren't that like boring kind of professional, like, here's who I am, I've done these things. And I think sometimes in our professional lives, it can be easy for us to all like look and sound the same, right? Because there's this, I don't know, this environment that we're trying to create.
Well, that's right. But let's not confuse polish and poise with humor. I believe you can have all of them exist in the same person. And for some folks, it feels alien or foreign to show certain parts of your personality. And there are certainly times in our professional lives where things are no laughing matter.
Right.
But what I learned throughout the course of my career, and particularly as a chief of staff, is if you play to the idea of something, and I've been super guilty of this, if I give you the idea of what I think you want in a chief of staff, or what I think you want in a lawyer, or what I think you want in a facilitator for something strategic for your organization, if I'm playing to that idea, it's not going to read right. Something is going to be off because I am trying to deliver a message to you in a way that I think is going to work for you instead of giving you me.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
It's that incongruence between here's my idea of lawyer. I wear a perfect business suit. I speak with gravitas. I don't smile. And I raise my voice when I want to make the point, right? If I'm playing to some idea of what you think a lawyer should be or who you think a lawyer should look like, or the same for a professor. And quite frankly, the reason that I did some of that accommodating and trying to play to the idea of my role instead of bringing me to my role, which I'm glad was refreshing to you. You should call my mother and let her know.
I will.
But it doesn't resonate with people, and it's not effective. And I had a student in a teacher evaluation, one of the students that I teach at Northwestern, wrote something about, watching me as a pregnant professor a couple of years ago when I was pregnant, and what it was like to watch me teach a 3-hour lecture while 8 months pregnant. And said in the evaluation, I never really thought about, female professors, and just sort of saying, you are not my idea of what a professor should look like. Talk about flapping around, Catherine. I mean, boy, oh boy, a 3-hour lecture, 8 months pregnant. This is a podcast. So for those of you who can't see me, I'm all of 5'3", 5'2", depending on the humidity and how high my hair wants to go. And so it was comical to watch me teaching about communication when I had a lot of me. My nonverbal communication space, body mass space had increased significantly and was increasing every week as they saw me. So bring yourself to what you do. Don't hide it. Don't play to the idea of, don't let your predecessor and their energy define how you're going to make your mark. Because when we talk about authenticity, it's often when we're trying to meet someone else's expectation of how we should be, that we're less effective than we could be because it doesn't read well. Someone reads that you're not as comfortable in your own skin and bring in your own humor or your own pattern of speaking. I have a phenomenal colleague who did amazing things in Silicon Valley. She was born and raised in India, and she is as thoughtful as they come and spunky and dynamic, but it comes out in very different patterns. It's so who she is. And it's been tremendously effective for her and fun to watch, by the way. But it's something that only she can do.
Yep. It resonates more to be who you are than to try and be something else that we think we need to be.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. And I think that's a great message for chiefs of staff who in many ways are almost, trained to emulate their principles.
I think that's a really important point for chiefs of staff. Part of what I teach is mirroring.
Yeah.
When it comes to nonverbal and the rest. And mirroring is something that very intelligent communicators do to make their audiences feel at home and at ease. And it's something we do naturally. When you study early childhood education, one of the first skills to say this person is thinking right and there are no developmental issues is, does the baby mimic or imitate? It's who we are as people. So you can't get rid of that piece because mirroring is a very effective communication tool. And I love playing mirroring exercises with my clients. But you've got to bring yourself to the mirroring exercise. And it's only when you don't want to be the 2.0 of the principal or be the junior varsity of the principal. And you don't want, if they hired you for your skills, your expertise, your personality, don't lose that because you're changing industry or you're going into an organization that, communicates in an entirely different way. You have to adapt and mirror, but bring yourself to it.
Bring it with you. Yeah. Bring all of that with you.
All right. A smart person like you is placing this person. There's value to their skills and attributes that this organization may need. And you can become ineffective in your role if you're playing to the idea of what you think the organization needs as opposed to bringing yourself, which you were chosen for a reason. And for those skills, let them shine.
Yep. Love that. Thanks for listening to the Chief of Staff Collective podcast. You can hear us on your favorite podcast app every other Monday. Make sure you subscribe, rate, and review so you don't miss an episode.